Now, I'm gonna be honest with you all. I have been watching basketball for quite some time. I don't think I've ever in my life seen a team, nor even thought about a team, whatever, fire their head coach 9 or 10 games right before the postseason, especially when that coach has led this team to a winning record and is going to make a postseason appearance. It's crazy. But here we are with the Memphis Grizzlies deciding to part ways with Taylor Jenkins. Again, this deep into the regular season, it's wild, wonky, and crazy. And of course, many people are begging the question why this is. Now, to be quite frank, the timing, it feels like everybody's just lost on this. Like, I don't know why they're firing him this late into the season. It absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. Maybe just possibly he lost the locker room a little bit more than a lot of people were originally set to believe. So that is a possibility. But nevertheless, when he got fired, we may not ever really know that answer. But why he got fired, there seems to be a bit of a divide in Memphis Grizzly fan base, and even some of the information I've learned from a lot of Memphis Grizzly fans out there. But it still kind of points to two major factors that have occurred with Taylor Jenkins while he's on this team. And a lot of people may not be able to recognize this on the surface because it seemed as if like everything was working out really well out in Memphis. This is a team that has found themselves consistently at the top of the conference all season long. Quite frankly, they've been battling with the second or third seed with the Houston Rockets for most of this season. Recently has seen a little bit of a slippage, but still making a postseason appearance, which is huge for a franchise that is consistently without their best player in Ja Morant, who has been in and out of the lineup all season long. And they have been doing this while relying on rotational players, some of which were in and out of the G League or even some rookies. Actually, their two rookies have received a lot of playing time, more so than I think a lot of people originally expected, especially Jalen Wells, who was a second-round pick. So getting the most out of this lemon certainly seems to be what Taylor Jenkins does best, and that's something that he has consistently done all throughout his time in Memphis, a team that, again, has constantly been dealing with injury problems or lack of availability, not only from Ja Morant, but also Triple J over the last 4 to 5 seasons, and yet the Grizzlies have constantly found themselves, especially when players are available, at the top of a competitive Western Conference, consistently making the playoffs, and Jenkins has been the most successful coach in franchise history, at least in terms of regular season record. So a lot of this, again, kind of begs the question to why? Well, there are two major reasons for a lot of this, and before I get into this video, I want to give a huge shout out to all the Memphis fans out there who kind of aided me in finding this information on the timeline. I'm not going to sit here and act like I watch enough Memphis Grizzlies games to give you a true assessment, and I didn't want to run in front of a camera and just be ignorantly wrong, because if we just look at like on the surface, there seems to be no problem whatsoever. So there has to be a little bit more digging that needed to be done. And trust me, as a Laker fan, I know this. I know this very, very too well. Record, standings, and even playoff success does not give you a true assessment on how good or bad a coach is. Trust me, I am still fighting Darvin Ham arguments to this day. To this day, it seemed as if like a lot of questions, concerns, reservations, and doubt really just surrounding Taylor Jenkins and his ability. He really and truly isn't the type of coach that can get you over the hump to truly competing at a very high level in the postseason. And so it felt as if like this team was just slowly walking into another first round exit, which has been pretty consistent out there in Memphis. And the reason why many people lean in this direction in terms of why they got rid of Taylor Jenkins is because the writing was on the wall before the season even began. The front office decided to move off of his entire coaching staff and bring in a completely new one, which was an easy sign to just tell you, like, hey man, this is probably going to be the last year, so if you don't figure it out this year, we definitely got our replacements just lined up ready for you. So that right there was a telltale sign. And when you start to watch more and more games, the concerns are very undeniable. Many Grizzly fans point out to the ongoing years back when they had Dillon Brooks on the roster. Brooks was a really good piece of this team, especially defensively, but really would shoot them out of a lot of games, especially in the postseason. And that was a problem with Dillon Brooks. But a lot of people felt as if like Taylor Jenkins should have been the one to reel him in to kind of really help out this team, especially when you're surrounded with Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and also Triple J. So that right there is something that it was ongoing before the season began. And once more, when the season kind of got kicked off, the rotations were very lengthy. Even to this day, it feels as if like they're still playing like 2 or 3 players too much. The rotation feels like 11-man rotation. There there's quite a few incidences, in particular against the Oklahoma City Thunder, where a player is in, I think it was Triple J, he's in the game, they're only up by like 2 or 3 points. He pulls them out for way too long, losing by like, I believe 14 or 15 points by the end of it all. And Triple J almost doesn't go back into the game whatsoever. So there's an idea to kind of point to. And just overall, the feel for the game, there are a couple late game situations where very winnable moments for the Memphis Grizzlies. The one that immediately comes to mind is against the Atlanta Hawks, where for whatever reason, you have 2 timeouts. Desmond Bane is bringing the ball up. For whatever reason, you don't get Trae Young into action to get the advantage, to create an open opportunity for you. Instead, you allow Desmond Bane to try to create a shot on Dyson Daniels, immediately turn the ball over, and then you end up losing that game because, again, you didn't decide to call a timeout, restructure, or at least have your team prepared for those type of moments, which has happened pretty consistently as of late. So there's that problem. And again, that's been ongoing for most of the tenure of Taylor Jenkins. Being that type of coach to get you over the hump doesn't seem like he's that, can be a floor raiser, if you will, but not a ceiling raiser. But going into the second problem that this team faced this year, and it was their offense, which, again, on the surface, seems to not be a problem. Memphis has been a consistent top 5, top 7 offense all season long, and they've been doing so because of this new identity that they've adopted thanks to the new coaching staff that they surrounded Taylor Jenkins with. In particular, Noah LaRosa, who I hope I'm saying his name correctly, but the offense that this team adopted under this new coaching staff was effectively removing all ball screens, and even if they did, it was very, very few in between. The way that this team created advantages was by trying to get by initial defenders, and then from there, once the defense shifted, the offense would rotate and shift accordingly. Players would move off ball, elevate, and kind of fill in some of the gaps, and then from there, you would get quality looks pretty consistently. Shout out to Thinking Basketball. They actually did a really good video explaining in detail this, but it was an offense that was very interesting to watch, and I actually saw my team, the Los Angeles Lakers, losing them early on because how unpredictable a lot of this was. Not saying that it wasn't easy to defend, but a lot of teams are just not prepared to go up against a roster where you have all 5 players moving in unison at one time, and you kind of feel like, you know, you have a feel for who's behind you, and then just like that, all of a sudden, the player that you think you're defending is now elevated and they're getting a quality look. And they won a lot of games early on that way. However, as time progressed and the season became a bit more difficult for them in terms of strength of schedule, that's when things started to become easily exposed because those advantages that were created from a Desmond Bane, a Triple J, and even a Ja Morant from time to time without a screen being set became more and more difficult to come by. And speaking of Ja, he probably became the biggest victim of this new offense where a lot of his numbers across the board started to see noticeable regressions. Many people like myself started to write it off just due to him finding his way back into the offense, and there really wasn't no need to force him out there. But when you start to watch these games a little bit more closely, you will easily start to realize that Ja was just floating around the 3-point line, a lot of times finding himself just stuck in the corner. And even though he would relocate where he needed to be, truth be told, as an individual, we all know Ja is not a 3-point shooter, so he's not really a threat when he's off ball floating around the 3-point line. And even when he got the ball in his hands, because the opposing team tend to put the best defender on him, or at least the best perimeter defender on him, he's not creating as many advantages as he used to because he's more of a screen setter type of a guard, come off the screen, pick and roll, put a lot of pressure on the defense by attacking the basket, and from there you shift the defense and get quality looks for your teammates. So for Ja Morant, he wasn't being maximized. However, it was very difficult to determine how much of a detriment that really was to the Memphis Grizzlies because, again, early on the season, easier schedule, easier wins, and it just seems as if, like, you know, hey, we look pretty good. Look at our record, but a lot of those wins are just inflated to further this point. Post All-Star break, or really post February 3rd, is where things have just fallen apart immensely. Post All-Star break, the Memphis Grizzlies have a record of 8-11, and their offense and defense has fallen off significantly. But what's probably even more telling is that since February 3rd, the only team that the Grizzlies have beaten that has an above 500 record are the Dallas Mavericks. And we all know, you know, the Dallas Mavericks, they're missing like half of the roster, so it doesn't really even count. And then before that, I believe it was like the Milwaukee Bucks, either on February 1st or February 2nd. That's a very, very telling sign that maybe, just maybe, this new offense that you're implementing may not work out as much. Now, the reason why a lot of people are focusing on the fact that the new offense that they've implemented may have been the turning point for the season, or at least it being exposed and not being as impactful. Ja Morant has openly acknowledged, or at least complained, that, you know, he doesn't really favor the new offense himself. Same thing with Zach Edey as well, where he's openly acknowledged that, hey, I feel like I'm best utilized when it comes to pick and roll rather than this wonky offensive system that they're utilizing. Also, right before Taylor Jenkins was fired, or at least maybe an 8 to 10 game sample size leading up to that, they started to tinker with their offense and experiment with more pick and rolls being utilized in their offense as well. So that was very interesting. But probably the biggest telltale sign is that not only did Taylor Jenkins lose his job, but also Noah LaRosa as well, who once more was the person who was spearheading this new offensive system. And what may be even more telling, that the offense was kind of the final straw that broke the camel's back in terms of why Taylor Jenkins got fired as well as LaRosa, is because who is now replacing Jenkins at the head coaching position, who is Tomas, someone who was a part of the assistant coaching staff this season and someone who has a track record of implementing pick and roll schemes, or at least being a little bit more imaginative in terms of his offensive schemes that implement pick and roll within that identity. Something that, again, should maximize not just Ja, but also Zach Edey, and potentially get this team back to where they need to be. Which is all very interesting because it does broach a much bigger question for the Memphis Grizzlies, and that is, bro, do we really blame Taylor Jenkins and any assistant that was brought to this team trying to structure an offense that didn't overly depend on Ja Morant if they can't even depend on him playing and being available for this team? I think that's a very, very real question. And you can even go beyond this season. The entire time Taylor Jenkins has been here, he has had to consistently deal with a roster that is either missing Ja or Triple J, if not both. Now, again, I'm not excusing everything, but it might make sense if you feel like, hey, we need to give somebody else some burn because they need the reps, because at any given time, Ja could go out and miss another 5 to 7 games and we have to figure it out without him anyway. And even though, yes, you could very well argue that this team from a one-loss perspective still looks better with Ja than without. However, the fact that the offense still sustained a near top 10 status, regardless of how weak the schedule may have been early on, they still sustained a top 10 status while Ja was floating around and not really maximizing who he was as a player. And so now if you pivot to another direction, I just don't necessarily know how well that's going to function, especially in games in which Ja may not be available, which it kind of feels like he is that next star that's going to constantly deal with nagging injuries. It was very interesting to me when he made the comment that he wasn't going to dunk anymore, not taking that literal, but kind of being a bit more hesitant because he knows that his body just isn't made or built for him to be jumping up and down at extreme heights and then falling on the floor and having a hard time getting back up and playing another, 5 to 7 games in a row right after those type of falls. But again, I still think that, firing Taylor Jenkins, if this team deemed it necessary to do so, I think that is still fine to move in that direction. It certainly seemed as if like the locker room was lost and there was a lot of frustration going on from the coaching and player perspective, especially when we got to see Desmond Bane pushing Aldama on the sideline because of poor defensive rotation or effort given from him, which at that point, it does feel as if like a lot of things are lost. But I do believe if you are the Grizzlies, this probably is the last move that you're going to make to try to figure out what you can squeeze out of Ja, because you already had a coach that was getting the most out of everybody else on the roster. Now you need to figure out what can we get the most out of Ja, Triple J, now Zach Edey. And if that still translates to only a first or second round exit, then I do believe that this may be a franchise that starts to move in a different direction, especially because I don't necessarily know how many more really great seasons we have out of Ja Morant, or at least really great seasons with these type of limitations. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.